driven by the agonizing sound of her 5-year-old son struggling for breath against a torrential downpour, Clara sought out the one place she swore she'd never return. She hurled herself at the heavy mahogany doors of Gabriel Rossi's fortified estate, screaming the words destined to shatter his brutal empire. "He's yours." The torrential downpour of October 14th felt less like weather and more like a punishment. Inside the rusted cabin of a 1998 Honda Civic, the air was thick with the metallic smell of panic and damp wool. Clara Higgins gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles shone bone white in the dim dashboard light. In the back seat, her 5-year-old son, Leo, was losing his battle for air. "Hold on, baby, just hold on," Clara pleaded, her voice cracking over the furious drumming of the rain. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Leo's chest heaved violently, sinking in deeply at the ribs with every ragged, whistling gasp. His lips, usually a soft, healthy pink, were terrifyingly tinged with blue. His eyes rolled back, heavy and exhausted. The severe asthma attack had triggered pneumonia, and the over-the-counter inhalers she had scraped together her last dimes to buy were doing absolutely nothing. 2 hospitals in the poorer districts of Trenton had turned her away over the last 48 hours. No health insurance, no permanent address, no social security card for the boy. Clara had spent 5 years living entirely off the grid, working under-the-table diner shifts and cleaning houses for cash. She had done it to survive, to hide. But her poverty had become a cage, and tonight it was going to be her son's coffin if she didn't do the unthinkable. She was driving toward the secluded, heavily wooded hills of the Bellingham estate in New Jersey. She was driving to the devil she knew. Gabriel Rossi. 5 years ago, Gabriel wasn't yet the head of the Rossi crime syndicate. He was the volatile, dangerously charismatic heir, and Clara had been a naive, 20-year-old waitress at the Silver Room, a high-end restaurant the family used to launder money. Their romance had been a secret, a violent collision of 2 different worlds that burned entirely too hot. When Clara found out she was pregnant, she didn't get a diamond ring or a fairy tale ending. She got a late-night visit from Gabriel's uncle, Silvio, and a loaded gun pressed to her temple. "The Rossi bloodline does not mix with the dirt of the streets," Silvio had whispered. "You disappear tonight, or I bury you and the bastard in the Pine Barrens. Gabriel will never know." So, Clara ran. She embraced grinding poverty to keep her child breathing. But now, ironically, the very secret she kept to save his life was killing him. The heavy iron gates of the Rossi compound loomed ahead, slick with rain and flanked by high-definition security cameras. 2 armed guards in dark slickers stepped out of the guardhouse, raising their hands for her to stop. Clara didn't hit the brakes. She slammed her foot on the accelerator. At the last possible second, she swerved onto the cobblestone shoulder, the Honda's tires screaming as they scraped the stone wall. She threw the car into park, ignoring the guards drawing their weapons. She leaped out into the freezing rain, threw open the back door, and unbuckled Leo's limp body. "Stop right there! Hands where I can see them!" One of the guards bellowed, racking the slide of his Glock. Clara ignored the gun pointed at her chest. She held her dying son up like an offering to a cruel god. "His name is Leo Rossi," she screamed, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "He is Gabriel's son. Look at him. He's dying. If you shoot me, you shoot the boss's blood. Open the damn gate." The guard faltered, a flashlight beam cutting through the rain to illuminate the boy's face. Even in the harsh, blue-white light, the resemblance was undeniable. The sharp jawline, the shock of dark hair. It was a miniature dying ghost of Gabriel Rossi. The guard lowered his weapon and tapped his earpiece, his voice frantic. Seconds later, the massive iron gates began to swing open. Clara didn't wait for her car. She ran, her soaked sneakers slipping on the steep driveway, clutching Leo's freezing body to her chest. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop until she reached the massive mahogany double doors of the main house. She began to pound her fists against the wood, leaving smears of blood from her raw knuckles. "Gabriel! Help him! Gabriel!" Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Gabriel Rossi sat at the head of a long, custom-built oak table. At 32, he was a hardened, terrifying figure. Since taking over the family after his uncle's sudden death, he had ruled with an iron fist, stripping away emotion to survive the brutal underworld politics. He was in the middle of a heated dispute with his right-hand man, Declan, regarding an intercepted shipment at the docks, when the frantic pounding echoed through the grand foyer. Gabriel frowned, the scar crossing his left eyebrow twitching. No one knocked on his door. Not like that. He stood up, pulling a Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster in one fluid motion, waving his men back. He stalked to the entryway, unbolted the heavy lock, and yanked the door open. The gun was aimed directly at the intruder's chest, but Gabriel's finger froze on the trigger. Standing on his marble threshold was a ghost. Clara. She was painfully thin, dressed in threadbare clothes, soaked through with freezing rain. But it wasn't her sunken cheeks or her terrified eyes that made the gun slip from Gabriel's grasp, clattering loudly onto the marble floor. It was the boy in her arms, the child whose chest was barely moving, his skin a horrifying shade of slate grey. Clara collapsed to her knees, unable to hold Leo's weight any longer. She looked up at the ruthless Mafia boss, her voice breaking into a primal, shattered sob. "He's yours, Gabriel. Please. He can't breathe." For exactly 3 seconds, time stopped. The brutal don of the Rossi family, a man who had orchestrated the downfall of rival empires without a flinch, was utterly paralyzed. He stared at the blue-lipped boy. The shape of the boy's brow, the curl of his dark hair. It was like looking into a twisted, terrifying mirror. Then, the survival instinct that made him a kingpin violently snapped into place. "Declan!" Gabriel's roar shook the chandelier above them. "Get Dr. Sullivan, now! Get him down here with the oxygen and the crash cart." Gabriel dropped to his knees, ignoring the puddle of muddy rainwater pooling on his pristine floors. He gently but firmly took the boy from Clara's trembling arms. Leo was horrifyingly light, his skin ice-cold to the touch. Gabriel carried him into the expansive living room, laying him flat on the massive leather sectional. "Breathe, kid. Come on. Breathe," Gabriel muttered, stripping the soaked, cheap thrift store jacket off the boy's chest. He could see the violent retractions, the spaces between Leo's ribs sucking inward as his failing lungs fought a losing war for oxygen. Clara hovered nearby, shaking violently, wrapping her arms around herself. "He needs albuterol and steroids. The clinic said it was pneumonia, but they wouldn't take him without a deposit," she babbled, the trauma of the last 48 hours breaking her mind into fragments. Heavy footsteps pounded down the spiral staircase. Dr. Arthur Sullivan, the Rossi family's private on-call physician, rushed into the room carrying a heavy black trauma bag. He took one look at Leo and immediately went to work, his movements clinical and precise. "Severe bronchospasm. Extreme hypoxia," Sullivan muttered, fitting a pediatric oxygen mask over Leo's face and hooking it to a portable green tank. "I'm administering intramuscular epinephrine and starting a high-dose steroid IV. Hold his arm steady, Gabriel." Gabriel Rossi, a man whose hands were stained with blood, held his son's tiny wrist with a gentleness that shocked his watching men. Declan stood in the doorway, his eyes darting between Clara and the boy, his jaw tight. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours. The hiss of the oxygen tank was the only sound in the room. Clara slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her face buried in her hands. Finally, a sharp, coughing gasp echoed through the room. Leo's chest expanded fully. The awful wheezing began to smooth out into deep, ragged breaths. The blue tint receded from his lips, replaced by a pale, fragile pink. Dr. Sullivan let out a long breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. He's stabilized, but he's severely malnourished and his immune system is compromised. He needs a warm bed, antibiotics, and constant monitoring. I'll set up a drip in the guest wing. Gabriel stood up slowly. His tailored suit was ruined, wet and wrinkled. He looked at Leo, watching the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest, before turning his gaze to Clara. The vulnerability in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. He crossed the room, grabbed Clara by her upper arm, and hauled her to her feet. "Declan, watch the boy. No one else comes in or out of this house." Gabriel dragged Clara down the hall, shoving her into his private study and locking the heavy oak door behind them. The room smelled of expensive leather, Cuban cigars, and danger. He backed her against his desk, trapping her. 5 years, Gabriel said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "You vanished without a trace. I tore this city apart looking for you. I thought you were dead. And now you show up on my doorstep with a dying boy and tell me I'm a father?" Clara lifted her chin, refusing to shrink back despite the terror radiating from him. "I didn't leave because I wanted to, Gabriel. I left because I was told to." "By who?" he demanded, slamming his fist onto the desk. "Who gave you an order that superseded mine?" "Your Uncle Silvio," Clara screamed, tears of rage finally spilling over. "The night I found out I was pregnant, he came to my apartment. He put a gun to my head. He told me that a half-breed street brat would make you weak, that your enemies would use us against you. He said if I didn't disappear, he would kill me and cut the baby out of me." Gabriel froze, the color draining from his face. Silvio, the man who had mentored him, the man he had mourned when he died of a sudden heart attack 2 years ago. "I lived in roach-infested motels," Clara sobbed, her voice breaking. "I ate scrap food from diner kitchen so I could buy his formula. I worked myself to the bone, Gabriel. I hid your son to keep him breathing. And I would have stayed hidden forever, but he got sick, and I couldn't save him." Gabriel stepped back, running a hand over his face. The magnitude of the betrayal, the stolen years, hit him like a physical blow. He had spent years hardening his heart, believing Clara had used him and abandoned him. Instead, she had been out in the cold, protecting his legacy. Before he could speak, the study door was knocked on sharply. Dr. Sullivan let himself in, his expression grave, clutching a tablet with blood work results from his portable lab. "Gabriel, we have a serious problem," the doctor said, ignoring the tension in the room. "Is it Leo? Did his lungs fail again?" Clara panicked, rushing forward. "No, the boy is sleeping," Sullivan said, his eyes flicking to Gabriel. "But his respiratory failure, it wasn't just triggered by natural pneumonia and asthma. When I ran his tox screen, I found abnormalities. I rushed a heavy metals and poison panel." Gabriel's posture straightened, the Mafia boss instantly overriding the shocked father. "Speak plainly, Arthur." "I found trace amounts of a synthesized industrial solvent in his bloodstream. Similar to carbon tetrachloride," Dr. Sullivan said quietly. "It attacks the respiratory system and mimics severe asthma over time. Someone has been intentionally poisoning this child for weeks." The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle a scream. Gabriel's eyes darkened, turning entirely black. Uncle Silvio was dead. That meant someone else knew about Clara and Leo. Someone who had found them in the slums of Trenton. Someone who wanted Gabriel's secret heir dead, but wanted it to look like a natural tragedy of poverty. Gabriel looked toward the locked door of the study, his mind racing through the faces of his trusted inner circle. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. The enemy was already inside. The silence in Gabriel's private study was heavier than the thunderstorm raging outside the estate windows. The revelation hung in the air like a live grenade. Poisoned. Someone had methodically, intimately, tried to suffocate Gabriel's child from the inside out. Gabriel's mind violently shifted gears from a grieving, shocked father to the ruthless don of the Rossi syndicate. He turned away from the window, his dark eyes locking onto Clara. She was trembling, her hands gripping the edges of his mahogany desk, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. Clara. Gabriel's voice was dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the fury boiling in his veins. I need you to think. Think back over the last 3 weeks. Who has been near him? Who has given him food, drink, or medicine? No one, Clara stammered, tears tracking down her pale cheeks. I swear, Gabriel, I don't trust anyone. We live in a rundown complex on Mercer Avenue. I work the closing shift at O'Reilly's Diner on 4th Street. I barely speak to the neighbors. I leave Leo with Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old blind woman down the hall, just so he isn't alone. Someone got to him, Dr. Sullivan interjected gently, packing his portable lab equipment. Carbon tetrachloride exposure in these trace amounts isn't accidental, especially in a residential setting. It's administered, ingested or inhaled through a heavily saturated medium, a toy, a blanket, a repeated snack. Clara's breath hitched, her eyes widened as a seemingly insignificant detail from her grueling daily routine suddenly clicked into horrifying focus. The juice, she whispered, the color completely draining from her face. Gabriel closed the distance between them, grasping her shoulders. What juice, Clara? Talk to me. There's a new maintenance man at the complex, she said, her voice shaking violently. He started about a month ago. He was unnervingly nice. He fixed the radiator in our unit for free. Whenever I brought Leo down to the courtyard to play before my shift, he was there. He always had these little organic apple juice boxes. He said his own kid didn't like them. He gave them to Leo, every few days. Gabriel, I didn't think. I was just grateful someone was being kind. Gabriel's jaw locked. Describe him. Tall, broad shoulders. Buzz cut, Clara recalled, squeezing her eyes shut to pull the image from her memory. He always wore a grey work uniform, but his collar was loose once. He had a tattoo on the right side of his neck, a black scorpion. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Declan, who had been standing guard silently by the door, cursed under his breath. Liam. Who is Liam? Clara asked, panicked. Liam is an enforcer, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal, hollow register. He works for Apex Logistics, a shell company owned by my cousin, Dominic. The pieces fell into a sickening, blood-soaked puzzle. Dominic. Gabriel's closest living relative, the man who sat at his right hand at Sunday dinners, the man who stood to inherit the entire Rossi empire if Gabriel died without an heir. Sylvia must have told Dominic about Clara and the baby before he died of his heart attack. Dominic had bided his time, waiting until the boy was old enough to be a permanent threat to his succession. But Dominic was a coward. He didn't want a messy hit that would draw Gabriel's wrath. He wanted it to look like a tragic, natural death in the slums of Trenton. Asthma, pneumonia, poverty. Declan, Gabriel commanded, his eyes completely dead of any warmth. Take a strike team to Mercer Avenue. If Liam is there, do not kill him. Bring him to the soundproof basement. If he isn't there, tear Trenton apart until you find him." "It's already done, boss." Declan nodded, pulling his weapon and slipping out the door into the corridor. Gabriel turned back to Clara. The fierce, terrifying Mafia boss softened for just a fraction of a second as he looked at the mother of his child. She was exhausted, broken, and terrified. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "You did everything right, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in 5 years. "You fought for him. You protected him when I couldn't. But you're done running. No one will ever touch you or my son again. Do you understand me?" Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the ruthless promise burning there. She nodded slowly. "Go to the guest wing. Dr. Sullivan has set up a room for you next to Leo's. Lock the door. Do not come out until I come for you," Gabriel instructed. As Clara was escorted upstairs by heavily armed guards, Gabriel descended into the bowels of the Bellingham estate. He stripped off his ruined suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white dress shirt. Tonight, the Rossi family was going to bleed out its own poison. It took Declan less than 2 hours. By 3 a.m., the heavy steel door of the basement interrogation room swung open. 2 heavily built soldiers dragged a bloodied, thrashing man into the center of the concrete floor, tossing him into a metal chair and securing his wrists with zip ties. Liam coughed, spitting blood onto the floor. The black scorpion tattoo on his neck was stark against his bruising skin. He looked up, his eyes widening in pure terror as Gabriel Rossi stepped out of the shadows, holding a pair of heavy iron knuckles. "Gabriel. Boss." "There's a mistake," Liam choked out, straining against the ties. Gabriel didn't yell. He didn't rant. He simply walked over, raised his fist, and brought the iron down across Liam's jaw with a sickening crack. Liam screamed, his chair tipping backward, but Declan caught it, slamming it back upright. "Carbon tetrachloride," Gabriel stated, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "In the juice boxes. You watched a 5-year-old boy gasp for air, you watched his mother cry, and you handed him another box." Liam's eyes darted frantically. He knew he was a dead man. The only thing left to negotiate was the amount of pain he would endure before the end. "Dominic!" Liam sobbed, blood pouring from his mouth. "It was Dominic. He said the kid was a bastard, a half-breed liability. He said Silvio wanted it done. He paid me 50 grand to make it look like sickness. Please, Gabriel, he's your family. I just took an order." "The boy is my family," Gabriel corrected coldly. He turned to Declan. "Finish him. Then, send a message to my cousin. Tell him I need him at the estate immediately. Tell him there's been an attack." The storm had finally broken by the time Dominic Rossi's black SUV sped up the winding driveway of the estate. Dawn was threatening to break, casting a dull, bruised purple light over the New Jersey hills. Dominic, a slick, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s, rushed through the front doors, his face arranged in a perfect mask of frantic concern. "Gabriel, the guards at the gate said we were hit. Are you okay? Where's the breach?" Gabriel was sitting in the grand living room, a crystal glass of amber bourbon in his hand. He looked completely at ease, perfectly juxtaposed against the tension radiating from the dozen armed men lining the walls of the room. "There was no breach, Dominic," Gabriel said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Sit down." Dominic hesitated, his eyes sweeping the room, calculating the subtle shifts in the guards' postures. They weren't looking at the doors. They were looking at him. He forced a strained laugh and took a seat on the leather armchair opposite Gabriel. "I don't understand, cousin. Declan called me, said it was an absolute emergency." "It is," Gabriel replied. He snapped his fingers. The heavy double doors of the living room opened. 2 guards walked in, carrying a large, heavy tarp, which they unceremoniously dropped onto the Persian rug between Gabriel and Dominic. The tarp fell open, revealing Liam's lifeless body. Dominic's breath caught in his throat. He completely froze, his meticulously crafted facade shattering into pieces. Liam was moonlighting as a maintenance man in Trenton, Gabriel said, his voice eerily conversational. Did you know that, Dominic? He had a very peculiar hobby. He liked handing out poisoned juice boxes to a little boy with my eyes. Dominic scrambled backward in his chair, his hand flying to the holster inside his jacket. But before his fingers could even brush the grip of his pistol, 3 red laser sights painted his chest. "Don't," Gabriel whispered, leaning forward, the ice in his voice freezing the air in the room. "Don't insult my intelligence by reaching for a gun, Dominic. You lost this war before you even knew you were fighting it." "He's a mutt, Gabriel," Dominic suddenly screamed, the panic giving way to defensive rage. "Silvio knew it. You were blind to that diner trash. If the families in New York found out you had a weak, illegitimate brat hidden in the slums, they would use him to bleed us dry. I was protecting the Rossi Syndicate. I was doing what you were too weak to do." "You were protecting your claim to my throne," Gabriel corrected, standing up slowly. He unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling them up deliberately. "You thought you could murder my blood and smile in my face at Sunday dinner. You thought you were the predator." Gabriel walked over to Dominic, looking down at the man he had grown up with. "The Syndicate survives because we protect our own. You broke the only rule that matters." Gabriel drew the Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster. Dominic raised his hands, tears of genuine terror finally spilling. "Gabriel, please, we are blood. I'm your cousin." "No," Gabriel said softly, the safety clicking off. "Leo is my blood. You are just a disease." A single, suppressed gunshot echoed through the massive living room, dull and muffled, but utterly final. Gabriel didn't watch Dominic's body hit the floor. He turned his back, holstering his weapon. "Clean this up," Gabriel ordered his men. "Burn Apex Logistics to the ground. Strip Dominic's assets. Funnel it all into an offshore trust in Leo's name. If anyone in the 5 families asks what happened, tell them Dominic was a traitor who stole from his Don. Let them whisper." Hours later, the sun finally broke through the heavy grey clouds, casting warm golden rays through the towering windows of the estate's guest wing. Gabriel stood in the doorway of the bedroom, leaning against the frame. The heavy scent of antiseptic was gone, replaced by the smell of rain-washed air from the open balcony. In the center of the room, on a massive, plush, king-sized bed, Leo was sitting up. The blue tint was completely gone from his skin. He looked pale and fragile, but he was breathing deeply, freely, the oxygen mask finally removed. He was eating a bowl of warm broth, a cartoon playing softly on the massive, flat-screen TV. Clara was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hand resting gently on her son's leg. She had showered and changed into a soft, oversized cashmere sweater one of the maids had provided. When she saw Gabriel in the doorway, she stiffened slightly, the memory of the night's violence still a heavy ghost between them. Gabriel stepped into the room slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. He walked to the side of the bed and looked down at his son. Up close, in the daylight, the resemblance was even more staggering. Leo looked up at the towering, scarred man. He didn't look afraid. He looked curious. "Hi," the little boy croaked, his voice raspy from the coughing. Gabriel's chest tightened, a strange, overwhelming pressure building behind his ribs. He slowly sank to his knees beside the bed, so he was eye level with the boy. "Hi, Leo. I'm Gabriel." "Are you the boss?" Leo asked innocently, taking a bite of his broth. My mum said we had to come see the boss to get my medicine. Gabriel looked at Clara, his eyes filled with a heavy, profound sorrow for the years he had missed, and a fierce, burning gratitude that they were finally here. He turned back to Leo and offered a small, rare smile. "I am," Gabriel said softly. "But to you, I'm just Dad. And you and your mum are never leaving this house again. You're home now." Clara let out a shaky breath, a single tear slipping down her face as Gabriel reached out, covering her hand with his own. The storm was over. The Mafia boss had found his heart, and the Rossi Empire would never be the same. If this story of ultimate betrayal, Mafia justice, and a mother's fierce love kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love intense drama, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another gripping real-life story. Let us know your favorite plot twist in the comments below.